NoFap doesn't really fix you. Here's what does. As a certified sex addiction therapist that's worked with hundreds and hundreds of men that have sex and porn addiction, obviously I became aware of the NoFap movement, which, by the way, just for the record, I haven't actually joined a program, done NoFap myself, but I understand the concept. The basic premise of it is fantastic, which is basically saying stop porn, stop masturbating. Semen retention actually gives you a lot of energy as a man, and you can actually channel that energy away from looking at porn and masturbating all the time and sort of being a weak human being to channeling that into moving towards your goals, being the father, being the husband that you're supposed to be, and just really crush life. I love that premise. The problem is it only helps you muscle through stopping. And ultimately, I have found that people that have tried NoFap, they get about 90 days and then they go back to it. And by the time they come to me in my program, they're like, well, I've tried therapy, I've tried NoFap, I've done this, I've done that. And the real truth of the matter is they really haven't gotten to the core of the issue, the underlying issue. Porn addiction, sex addiction is just a symptom of a deeper issue. So if you set out to muscle through and white knuckle sexual sobriety without dealing with the internal response to life that is really at the root of the issue, eventually you're going to act out. And I'll explain that a little bit more in depth here. It took a long time for me to realize in my own attempts to do recovery that it was much more than just staying sexually sober, that I could muscle through a couple of days, a couple of weeks, sometimes I'd get a couple of months, but then I'd always go back to it. And that's because that's what addiction is. It's an inability to stop once we start acting out. That's the ritual of sex addiction that people go through. It really looks like sitting down, looking at pornography and telling yourself, I'm just going to do it for a few minutes, and then you're clicking away and clicking away and clicking away, and hours and hours and hours go by, and now it's 4 a.m, you have to get up and work in the morning. That's the physical compulsion to this. And then when the person stops, when I would stop doing that, right, 4 a.m., I'd tell myself, maybe call in sick that day or something like that. I'd tell myself, I'm never going to do it again. Last night was the last time I'm going to do it. And then at some point in the near future, I would had a mental obsession of the mind that would hit me and tell me the lies, well, I can do it one more time. Well, I'll just do it for 10 minutes this time. And I would tell all myself these lies. But the truth is the obsession grew and grew and grew. And I would start looking at pornography again. And it would suck me into that trance and that ritual. And I go through. And then I'd emerge remorseful, promising myself I'm never going to do it again. That's what addiction is. It wasn't until somebody said to me, Russell, your problem is not acting out. Your problem is not porn. Your problem is a life problem, a sober problem. And I had to ask them, like, what do you actually mean by that? And they explained to me that, like, while, yes, the porn use and the sex addiction and all the things I do in my sex addiction is problematic, the truth of the matter is I'm utilizing that stuff to medicate an internal reaction to life. I get into this trance-like state and I get sucked into it and I forget about everything else in my life. It's very medicative. It's just like what a drug addict does, because I have a history with drug addiction myself, and that's exactly what would happen. During the period of time that I was getting high, I felt better internally, but everything outside of me that I was worried about and all the stresses of life and all that stuff kind of melted away. And then I'd be done with the binge again, just like with sex addiction, emerging remorseful, telling myself I'm never going to do it again. So when that person that was helping me, this is in a treatment center, pointed that out to me, that I had a life problem, not a alcohol problem or a sex problem. For me, it was substance use and sex addiction. And I suddenly realized, like, wow, if I actually heal the life issue, 2 things are going to happen. 1, I won't feel like I need to act out as much. And 2, my life will get better because I'm working on my life problem. Now, I'm pretty sure that NoFap, it's kind of like, come in, get support from other people. You're in a community of other men that are trying to stop porn, trying to stop masturbating. And that's kind of the goal is to stop. You know, just for today, don't look at porn, don't masturbate. And you do one day and then you do another day and then you do another day. The problem is that, as you can see from my previous description, is that leaves the underlying issue unaddressed. So for a lot of people, and this is not everybody, some people will stop masturbating and looking at porn and then they feel great. And they're able to stop. They made a decision to stop and they're able to stop without addressing the underlying issue. I personally think, and these are the people that I work with in my program, are the type of people that they stop the porn and they actually, over time, they might feel good initially for maybe like a couple of days, couple of weeks, a month, maybe even a little bit more. But then because they haven't addressed the real core of the issue, the underlying issue, that restless, irritable, and discontent comes back and then inevitably will act out. So for some people, this was my story, and many of the men that I work with, that muscling through a day at a time, like NoFap tells you, doesn't address the underlying issue, so that it's inevitable that they're going to act out unless they start to heal the internal reaction to life. Now, by the way, the 12-step programs are riddled with people that do this. I'm not knocking 12-step programs. I'm not knocking NoFap either, because for some people it's really great. Very few people in 12-step programs for sex addiction and porn addiction, same with Alcoholics Anonymous, same with whatever 12-step group, whatever addiction, they go in and they go to the meeting and they get a bunch of friends, a bunch of cheerleaders that say, just don't drink no matter what. Just don't drink one day at a time. Just don't drink one day. Or if it's a 12-step group for sex addiction, just don't act out one day at a time. And they come in and they actually don't even do the 12 steps. They come in, they get a sponsor. They sort of get a sponsor that can, like, they can call on a daily basis and they can sort of complain about their life and stuff like that. They can come into the group. They can talk about how bad things are, or sort of like a group therapy session. And then they leave and all they've done is complain about their life. They haven't actually done the work, the actual solution, the work on themselves, which, by the way, in 12-step groups, if people actually come in and they get a sponsor and they actually work the 12 steps, then they treat the underlying issue. When I say underlying issue, they call it a spiritual malady. So the 12 steps are essentially spiritual, but they're also cognitive behavioral in nature, where they're writing, they're seeing truth about themselves, they're getting honest with themselves, they're looking at their fears, they're looking at their false beliefs, and it's a very healing experience. They make amends to people that they've harmed, they help others, but very few people actually do the 12 steps. So what happens is, same thing as NoFap, they come in, they try to muscle through a day at a time, just one day at a time, right? Just stay sober one day at a time. They don't do the 12 steps. They get some friends and they come back. I'm telling you, I'm in 12-step groups all the time. They come back over and over and over again. I got a couple of weeks, but I relapsed again. Really thinking about doing those steps. I'm thinking about getting a sponsor and doing this, but they never do it. They never actually do the internal work that's necessary to heal from this. So that's why I perceive, anyways, when I have people come that have tried NoFap, that it doesn't work, because they haven't actually coupled that with the internal work. And for some people, they need sexual acting out. This was my case too. They need that to feel better, to get out of themselves. But the good news about all of that is that when you do the tough work, which is what we do in my program, when you do the 12 steps in a 12-step program, you really do the deep work, amazing thing happens. When you start to heal the underlying issue, that mental obsession that I talked about, the thing that brings you back to it over and over and over again, basically goes away. It doesn't mean that you don't become sexual. It doesn't mean that you don't have lust. It doesn't mean that you don't struggle with urges. It just means that you no longer... I used to get this gut-wrenching desire. It was really a desire to act out. It wasn't even like fantasy or like lust. It was just really a gut-wrenching desire to act out, to go sit down at the computer and click away for a couple of hours just to get out of myself, to give myself some release. Same thing that would happen with alcohol. I would get the desire to drink alcohol, and then it was really to get some relief in my life, right? And I'd go back to it. So what happens is that mental obsession actually lessens significantly. And so I'm 16 years sexually sober. I'm also 16 years sober with the substances, and I almost never think about acting out. It's much easier. And because I've learned certain tools in my life to maintain health and wellness internally, again, my reaction to life, looking at my fears, looking at my false beliefs, looking at my behaviors, being honest with myself, being honest with all the things that were just completely out the window that I never dealt with in my life, looking back into the past, seeing the things that happened to me, making sense of stuff, having a life narrative. These are all things that we do in the program. All that self-awareness heals the underlying issue, and the mental obsession goes away, and then all of a sudden people are able to easily stay away from sexual acting out or pornography. And this happens all the time in my program, where somebody's working through and they're about a month into the program and they're like, I can't believe it. I'm not even thinking about acting out. I don't have that desire to act out. That's true freedom, which is amazing. If you're tracking on what I'm saying, that's kind of how I perceive NoFap. But if this is, making sense to you and you're like, yes, this has been my experience. I've tried to muscle through my urges. I've tried to muscle through sexual sobriety, and you want to try something different where we actually not only give you the structure and the community and the groups, but a clear recovery process that really helps you understand the issue and at the same time begins to deal with the underlying issue so that you can get true freedom from the obsession to act out. And like I said, it's a win-win, right? The obsession goes away and you start to feel better in life. If you're interested in having that experience, somewhere around this video, down below, wherever, click through, there's a link. go to our website landing page, schedule a free recovery session with one of our recovery advisors. We're going to dig into your situation. By the way, you'll get a free recovery plan out of it, regardless of whether you work with us. And you're going to learn a lot about yourself, regardless of whether you work with us. And if it does make sense, we think you'd be a good fit for our program, you think our program's a good fit, we talk about what it would look like doing that and moving forward and helping you get to that place. So we'll talk to you soon.